The presentation of the colors is by the local VFW posts. On this special occasion, this represents the 26th Infantry Yankee Division. This division was responsible for liberating the concentration camp of Mauthausen and Gusen in late April and May 1945. At this time, I would like to invite the Salem State University Chorale to the podium so they can sing the national anthem. Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite the survivors, their families, and the Holocaust Legacy Partners to come forward for the candle lighting ceremony. They'll be led into the auditorium by, by Mallory Kessler. Thank you. Everyone, you could please be seated. Good evening. Welcome to the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies Yom HaShoah commemoration. My name is Chris Moriello. I'm a professor of history at Salem State University and director of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. On behalf of the center, its faculty, its students, its boards, welcome to the Yom HaShoah commemoration, one of our signature events during the year. As I prepared my remarks for tonight, I wanted to begin with a personal story. It's a personal story about my visit to Poland. Each year for the last 15 years, I've taken Salem State University students abroad to sites of atrocities and genocide throughout Europe. In 2002, I took a group of around 35 students to study the Holocaust in Poland. I was a relatively new professor at the university. It was one of my first trips. And one of the places we stopped at was the old synagogue museum in the former Krakow ghetto. And as we walked through each room, the rooms were organized by centuries of Jewish life in Poland prior to World War II. Over 1,000 years of history, of life, of culture, of literature, of teaching. And each room was organized. As we walked through, we learned about Jewish life. We turned the corner and we entered the room for the 20th century. And as I was walking with my students, the room ended in 1939. And being naive, I walked around the corner and I didn't see another room. I turned around, I walked up to the administration desk and I said, "Excuse me, I'm Professor Moriello. Where is the next room?" They smiled, politely in Polish, and then in broken English and said, "There are no more rooms." I was devastated, my students were devastated. We didn't know where to go. But of course, there is a next room. The next room is the present. But we are left with the complexity of how we can commemorate the past of the Holocaust while continuing to search for its destructive footprints in our own lives and our own times. How do we negotiate the horrors of the past with our present reality? As we look back on history tonight, we are no longer naive enough to believe never again. The Armenian genocide predated the Holocaust. And since 1945, genocides were perpetrated in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Sudan. Just a few weeks ago, we watched as Syria's leader, Bashar al-Assad, use poison gas on his own people. We watched again as innocent children were murdered by a genocidal regime and millions of completely innocent civilians were scattered as refugees around the globe. There is urgency in my words, and there is urgency in the mission of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Yes, we must learn the universal lessons of the Holocaust, but we must implement those lessons by taking action in our own present and engage and prepare the next generation to recognize the anti-Semitism, racism, prejudice, and ethnic hatred that leads to genocide. This year, we celebrate and honor the teachers who teach the Holocaust and human rights in their classrooms and the students who put those lessons into action. The Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies educational programs are at the very heart of what we do. Our Holocaust Legacy Partners projects takes the stories of individual survivors, brings it out into the community so those stories will not die. The faculty and graduate students teaching in our Certificate in Holocaust and Genocide Studies program research, teach, and share their knowledge and deep understanding of comparative genocide. A new generation of teachers in our region who choose to keep the Holocaust and human rights education central to their teaching and in the curriculum of their schools and to the students they teach. We've also initiated a Teaching Difficult Topics series, providing teachers with professional development workshops on the Holocaust, Native American history, and civil rights. And finally, the Sonia Schreiber-White's Upstander Award. We are honoring some of those recipients tonight. So as we join together tonight to remember and honor the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, and the willful attempt to destroy the vibrant Jewish culture of pre-war Europe. Let us do so in order to act in the present with a new urgency and a new commitment to peace, justice, and human rights for all. At this time, I would like to invite Mary Kiley, Holocaust Legacy Partner for Sonia Schreiber-Weitz, up to the stage to read poem.
Door to door, from generation to generation. We who lived through hell, and you who know us well, we form a bond beyond the norm eternally. You must not weep. You must not fear. We do not sleep. We're here to guide your hand. And when the last of us is gone, you'll understand and carry on. By the wisdom of your mind, by the power of your heart, you are sensitive and smart. You'll find a way. And so, we bestow the hope, the trust, the future, the past upon you, and indeed upon your seed.
Thank you, Mary. At this time, I would like to invite up to the stage Anna McCoy. You stand right here. This year, we're initiating something new to complement our Sonia Schreiber-Weitz Upstander Award. This year, the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies is presenting a Distinguished Teaching Award for a teacher who has worked with the center during the year to advance Holocaust education at their school. This year, Anna McCoy and the Pingree School, colleagues at the Pingree School in Hamilton, along with their whole department that is deeply committed to human rights education, had their students come to Salem State for a day of education with us. We were inspired by their work, we were inspired by their passion, we were challenged by their questions. The teachers, students impressed us with their hard work, and as you will see tonight, with their incredible projects they did on the Holocaust. So on behalf of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, I'd like to present this certificate to Anna Mae McCoy in recognition of her teaching. It's all yours.
Jacob, do you want to come up? I'm so completely humbled by this recognition, especially it is coming from one of the finest educators I've had the pleasure of knowing, Dr. Chris Moriello. Thank you for all that you do. And presented in front of another, my teacher, boss, mentor, and friend, Carolyn Puchkowska, who is the head of the Pingree History Department, and who as my 9th grade history teacher introduced me to the concept of human rights, and whose example of compassion, scholarship, humor, and decency remain the standard to which I hold myself today. And she leads the way in our history department, making sure that every class we teach focuses on justice and human rights. It is my experience that the best teachers are those who themselves had extraordinary teachers, and Carolyn, you have been amongst the most extraordinary I have ever known. The recognition I have been blessed with tonight is largely due to the 25 years I have spent as your student. Thank you. I am pleased to have the opportunity to recognize one of the exceptional students from a class I taught this past winter, the Holocaust and Human Rights. Before introducing Jacob, however, I'd like to acknowledge the work of his classmates, all of whom delved deeply and courageously into the studies of the Nazi genocide, and through whose independent research I furthered my understanding of the atrocities committed by the Einsatzgruppen on the Eastern Front, the experiences of children in the Warsaw Ghetto, and the discrimination experienced by women who are part of the Lebensborn program. These students, upstanders all, will carry on the good and righteous work begun years ago by Sonja Weitz and her contemporaries, and continued today by those in this room. Jacob Rucker is a junior at Pingree. He made the unusual, and some might say ill-advised, decision to double up in history his 11th grade year, and so was the only junior in this senior elective. A dedicated and curious history student, he was stymied at first by the breadth of topics available to him when he set out to write his senior research paper, but eventually decided that he would focus his research on the experiences of youth under Nazi Germany. I wish I could take credit for the final product, but I was a mere passenger on his journey of discovery. He is worthy of much praise, and I am lucky to have been his teacher. Jacob.
Thank you, Ms. McCoy, and congratulations. Hello, everyone. I guess I'll just dive right into it. So why Nazi youth? Why did I decide to write my research paper on this topic when, like my teacher said, there were many other options for me to write about? Why did this topic interest me? Well, I'd like to start from the beginning, when I was assigned to what I thought at the time as an extremely daunting task, to write a senior research paper as a junior. I remember complaining to the only person I thought would fix this problem, and that was my advisor. I now realize how much time I wasted protesting that my school made a mistake placing me in a senior class as a junior when I could have spent it thanking Ms. McCoy for this opportunity. This class, the Holocaust and Human Rights, turned out to be my favorite of the year. I'm now more knowledgeable in a topic that interests me. I'm now more informed in a topic that represents who I am. I'm now more intrigued in a topic that describes my family's Jewish ancestry and that of some of my friends, and that topic being the Holocaust. From starting with the basics of the Holocaust to learning about the youth in the Lebensraum, I knew exactly what I was going to write my research paper on. I started to research. I hit the books, I read many journals, or at least I started with a very reliable source, Wikipedia. After consulting Wikipedia, I dove into more reliable sources. For example, The Nazi Conscience by Claudia Kunz. This book, being one of my most used sources, describes how the Nazis used censorship of art to teach anti-Semitism to children of Germany. Jewish art was destroyed, considering Hitler defined true German art as art that glorified the German countryside, the glories of the past, animals, and true Aryan children, not Jews. Another source that I used was Facing History and Ourselves, Holocaust and Human Behavior. Similar to my other sources, this book talked about how the Nazis tried their best to rid Germany of works and publications of Jews or of those that wrote about ideals that would contradict the Nazis' dictatorship. Strom outlines that this means Nazis rid themselves of books by Karl Marx with his materialistic views and no more Thomas Mann with his individualism. In addition, on May 10th, 1933, Nazi university students throughout the nation threw tons of banned books into bonfires and justified this with the feeling that it was intellectual vandalism and an act of moral purification. Learning about the Holocaust and the Nazi youth is important because it represents a harsh truth that a whole nation was under the complete control of a single ideology. Evidence that I wrote about in my research paper shows that millions of people were indoctrinated from their first word, since meeting their first friend and teacher in school, and they blindly followed the swastika without question. I researched primarily about the daily life of a child in Germany who was part of the Jugend or the Hitler Youth. I was shocked at what I discovered. I uncovered that people, specifically families and children, wanted willingly to be part of the Nazi Youth, to be part of the Hitler's 1,000-year rule. Germans at that time who were in the Nazi Youth were made to feel elite and special. The backbone and heavily embedded idea of an unfulfilled promise that they were to be part of the select group sworn in to rule the world. Hitler's goal was to produce a core of unscrupulous children who were blindly devoted to the Fuhrer and to the new German master race. Through reinforced methods of visual and educational propaganda, Germans targeted the German youth to achieve fascist and anti-Semitic ideology. Specifically, I focused more on those students and their daily lives in school, which included hours and hours of classes that had Nazi propaganda idolizing and worshiping German ideology, while denouncing Jews as traitors and major threats to not only Germany but the entire world. Images, children's books, political cartoons, drawings, and films depicted Jews as inferior and devilish were not that hard to find while I was researching. I was very disturbed but intrigued. Indeed, I found it interesting to see the lies and methods of manipulation Hitler used to indoctrinate the youth to shape Germany's future. Personally, researching about this topic was a little uncomfortable as I uncovered the motives of the Holocaust and reading some of Mein Kampf. The whole thing made me feel a little angered and just indisposed. After describing that pseudoscience in my paper that the Aryan race was somehow superior, I came to the conclusion that it is important that we continue to study the Holocaust because it provides one of the most effective subjects for examining basic human moral issues. These issues affect young people primarily because it makes them work to understand how a modern nation can utilize its technological expertise and bureaucratic infrastructure to implement destructive policies ranging, sadly, to genocide. Studying the Holocaust helped me understand the roots and ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping in any society. But more importantly, it allowed me to explore the dangers of remaining silent and indifferent to the oppression and maltreatment and persecution of others. But above all, studying the Holocaust made me proud to be Jewish. Thank you.
The future is in good hands. At this time, I would like to welcome onto the stage John Keenan, Vice President of Administration at Salem State University, to give welcome remarks from the university.
Good evening, everyone. I was speaking with Mayor Betancourt before this got started and said to him what a spectacular space he has here at the Higgins Middle School. It's certainly appropriate for such an event as this evening. It's a spectacular space, Mr. Mayor. Also wanted to thank Jacob for your remarks. I know you're only a junior, but we're always recruiting at Salem State, and we'd love to have you next year. You're a fantastic student, and I'm sure you could help Professor Moriello. And I also wanted to recognize my former colleague. I'm the former one, actually, but Representative Lori Ehrlich, who's joined us this evening as well. I know you have a busy week coming up with the budget, so I very much appreciate you joining us here tonight. First, on behalf of President Patricia Meservey and the entire Salem State community, I want to thank Professor Moriello for his tireless advocacy on behalf of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Salem State is extremely proud and honored to now host the center. Indeed, it is our moral obligation to ensure that we never forget the atrocities inflicted on millions of people during the Nazi regime. I also want to thank and remember certainly Sonia for the vision to start the center, and Harriet Wax, who directed the center until it moved at Salem State. You may have seen in the Salem News recently, just this past week at Salem State, we were privileged to welcome 92-year-old Reuben Steyer to campus to hear his story of survival through the Holocaust. He lived in the Jewish ghetto in Poland before being taken from his family and spending 4 years in 2 different camps. We had a full house much like this, and you certainly could have heard a pin drop as he told his horrifying story and journey of survival, at one time left for dead and stripped of all his tattered clothes. Ultimately, Reuben expressed his gratitude for coming to the United States. Remarkably, he and his daughter actually started a scholarship to enable students at Salem State of color to attend an annual conference, Black, Brown, and College Bound. So today, as we remember the millions who were lost in the Holocaust, I am also thinking of Reuben's parents, who we never saw again after he was torn from them in the ghetto. Through Professor Moriello's work at the center, we at Salem State are doing our part to make sure students in the entire North Shore understand the Holocaust and genocide. This work seems even more important today as the rise of anti-Semitic incidents that have occurred since the election, especially on campus, have risen. Despite repeated cries of never again, genocide unfortunately remains an ongoing problem and continues to haunt humanity. Thus, we are both here to remember the lives that were lost, but also be reminded of the loss of suffered by missing the collective contribution of Jews to our culture, science, and the arts. This ceremony is our effort at Salem State and the Center to educate our students and the community members to combat hate crimes of prejudice, stereotypes against all groups. This work, respect for diversity, inclusivity, is an essential part of Salem State's mission for social justice. I also want to recognize Mayor Betancourt, certainly, for your leadership in the Tanner City on inclusivity and tolerance. I look forward to tonight's presentation, and again, on behalf of President Meservey, we are extremely proud of all the work that Professor Moriello does at the Center. Thank you.
Peabody, Massachusetts has been the home of the Holocaust Center Boston North, or was the home of the Holocaust Center Boston North for over 35 years. And the city of Peabody has been a wonderful host for Yom HaShoah for years. That continues now in this beautiful facility at the middle school here. At this time, I'd like to introduce the Mayor of Peabody, Mayor Betancourt.
Good evening, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you tonight. And I'm very proud to welcome all of you to our new Higgins Middle School. This school opened in September, a $92 million project that was undertaken by our city, and shows the commitment that we have here in the city of Peabody to education. It was the biggest project that we've ever done in the city, and I'm proud to say it was completed on time and actually under budget, which is wonderful words to be able to say. I get excited by what's going to take place here in educating our youth, the 21st century technology, the science labs, the beautiful classrooms, because education is so important. And I'm very proud of what's going to take place here. The project is still going forward. Next door where the old school was, it's been demolished, and we're preparing for a beautiful sports complex. Softball field, football field, soccer, lacrosse fields. And it's a beautiful place, and it's wonderful to host this ceremony, and I'm very proud to be the mayor of the city and hosting this event. Certainly, and as outlined by Dr. Moriello, the world can be a scary place. It can be a volatile place. And now, as much as any time, we need to stand together in peace and brotherhood and on guard and vigilant to make sure things that happened years ago never happen again. And it takes all of us, our youth, our seniors, all of us to stand together to make sure such atrocities never happen. I'm very proud to be here with you in that spirit of brotherhood and peace as we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children that were killed in World War II. I'm proud to have the city of Peabody host this event and be the home of the center for so many years. Mayor Turigian's wife, Jackie Turigian, is here tonight, and I know this was very special to him as well, and his spirit is with us tonight. I'm very proud to have Peabody's own Sonia White's, her inspiring words to continue the education moving forward about what took place, and I'm very proud to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for letting Peabody be a part of it, and I want to thank Salem State for the continuing to have Peabody be a part of this important ceremony. Thank you.
Thanks for your words. At this time, I would like to bring up Cantor Elena Rosenfeld from Shirat Hayam Swampscott to lead us in the memorial prayers.
El male rachamim shochen b'meromim haמצי מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות אחינו בני ישראל, הקדושים והטהורים, שנפלו בידי הרוצחים ונשפך דמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה, ובשאר מחנות השמד באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, ושנשרפו, ושנטבעו, ושנחנקו על קידוש השם. בעבור שכל הקהל הקדוש הזה מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמותם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו על משכבותם בשלום, ונאמר Amen. We continue with the Mourner's Kaddish, page 14. And we're going to read it as it is in here with the names of the camps next to it. Yitgadal, Auschwitz. Vitkadash, Bar Yar. Shemei Rabbah, Belzec. Be'alema divarach Ute, Bergen-Belsen. V'yamlich malchute, Buchenwald. B'chayechon u'v'yom echon, Chelmo. Uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Daka. Ba'agala u'vizman kari v'meru, Flossenburg. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, Gross Rosen. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam, Mauthausen. V'yitnaseh v'yithadar, Majdanek. V'yitpa'ale v'yithalal, Ravensbrück. Shemei dekudsha brichu, Sackhausen. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata sobibor. Tushbechata v'nechemata stutov. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru terezin. Amen. Yehi Shalom Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. Oseh Shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. May be seated.
At this time, I would like to invite up Professor Lisa Molman, who's our Faculty Research Associate at the Center, to award the Sonia Schreiber-Weitz Award.
I'm very honored this evening to be able to award the Sonia Schreiber-Weitz Upstander Award. This award is to
to honor exemplary students who are upstanders and not bystanders. These students honor and personify the memory of Sonia Schreiber-Weitz by dedicating themselves to taking action on behalf of others who are persecuted. They each play a role in making our world a better place. And I'm going to start with the honorable mentions first. When I call your name, just come up to receive your award. Professor Moriello has it in his hand. Milena Aguilacas from Holton Richmond Middle School in Danvers, Mass. Fares Burote from Holton Richmond Middle School in Danvers, Mass. Emma Carter from Brookwood School in Manchester. Brooke Gerster from Brookwood School in Manchester. Annabelle Howard from Brookwood School in Manchester. David Kobrowski from St. John's Prep in Danvers. Isabel Small from Brookwood School in Manchester. Amelia Tardy from the Brookwood School in Manchester. Melanie Zimmerman from Holton Richmond Middle School in Danvers, Mass. And now we have 3 recipients of the Upstander Award. The first one I'll call up is Angela DeAngelis from Holton Richmond Middle School. Chase Reinders from Brookwood School. And Hannah Wilson from the Pingree School in South Hamilton. Congratulations to all of the recipients and the honorable mentions. Maybe one more round of applause.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Samuel Kassow. Dr. Kassow was born in a DP camp in post-war Germany to parents who survived the Holocaust. Dr. Kassow is one of the leading experts on the life of Jews before and during the Holocaust in Poland. His recent work on the Warsaw Ghetto, historian Emanuel Ringelblum, and his group's efforts to document the Jewish culture in the face of destruction won widespread international acclaim. Dr. Kassow serves as the Charles H. Northam Professor of History at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. Please welcome Dr. Kassow.
Well, good evening. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you to Salem State. And it's great to see such a nice turnout. I see that I'm supposed to talk about misconceptions and Holocaust denial. I'll talk about history and misconceptions. I'm not going to talk about Holocaust denial so much, but I do want to talk about resistance during the Holocaust, and especially about cultural resistance. In the early years of the State of Israel, there was a profound ambivalence about how to deal with the Holocaust, how to remember the Holocaust. There was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of bad conscience, and especially among younger Israelis, again in those early years, up to the 60s, there was a certain degree of condescension, let's be honest. Why did so many Jews let themselves get killed? Why didn't they fight back? We Sabras, we would have fought. And along with that ambivalence, there was a lot of disagreement about what date to choose to remember the disaster. The Orthodox, the religious, proposed one date. And finally, the Israeli Knesset chose a date, Yom HaShoah, Gvura, the day to remember the Shoah and heroism that was linked to the Battle of the Warsaw Ghetto. And this reflected a certain belief that somehow the heroic kids who fought off the Germans for a month in the Warsaw Ghetto, that their heroism somehow redeemed Jewish honor. And that's why the words heroism and Shoah were linked together. But I always felt a certain unease about this, that there was a danger that there would be an invidious, if not malicious, then it's still an invidious distinction between those very few who fought with guns and the millions who did not. An invidious distinction which leads to such mindless and hurtful phrases as they went to their deaths like sheep to the slaughter. I remember my mother telling me that in the ghetto where she was, in a rural area near Vilna, there was a young doctor, and Dr. Rabinowitz, and his father was an elderly rabbi. Because he was a doctor, the partisans in the nearby forest sent an emissary into the ghetto asking him to leave the ghetto and join them. They needed a physician. And he said, I can't do that. How am I going to leave my father? And when the Germans came to kill everybody, instead of running or trying to save his life, he calmly walked together with his father to the ditch. They undressed and they were shot. Now, is this behavior any less heroic than had he gone into the forest and left his father? And it's no coincidence that so many of the fighters were young people who'd already lost their parents and not yet had children. that so much of whether to fight or not to fight depended not just on getting arms, but whether you're going to leave your family. And as we think about that, we also have to remember that there were many, many other kinds of resistance besides armed resistance. And the resistance I want to talk about tonight is cultural resistance, and especially the battle for memory. And I want to talk about a real hero of that battle, a historian named Emanuel Ringelblum, about whom I've written a book. And in January, a movie will come out about this amazing man, directed by Roberta Grossman and produced by Nancy Spielberg. On March 1st, 1944, just 1 week before he was captured and killed by the Germans, Ringelblum wrote one of his last letters to a friend of his who, like himself at that time, was hiding on the Aryan side of Nazi-occupied Warsaw. And in this letter, which was heavily coded, Ringelblum asked, "If none of us lives to see the end of the war, what will happen to the OS?" The OS was code for Onik Shabbos, Onik Shabbat, Joy of the Sabbath, which in turn was the code word for the archive project, the archive that they had buried under the Warsaw Ghetto. And Ringelblum had very good reason to worry, because by the time the war was over, of the 60 or so people that he had brought into that project, there were only 3 survivors. And of the 3 survivors, only one, Hirschwasser, knew where they had buried the archive under a school, Novolipki 68, in the ghetto. Wasser survived by the slimmest of margins, jumping from a train that was taking him to Treblinka. After the war, those 3 survivors cajoled, buttonholed everybody they could find. Let's look for this archive. Let's find this buried treasure. But it was hard because, 1, you needed a lot of money, which they finally got. But 2, if you looked at photographs of what Warsaw looked like in 1945 and 1946, it was literally just one big heap of rubble. After the bombing of 1939, after the Jewish ghetto uprising of 43, after the Polish uprising of August 44, in which 200,000 Poles were killed, there was nothing left of the entire core of the city. It was hard to know where a street had been, much less where a particular building had been. But using the fact that the spire of a Catholic church remained standing, and using pre-war aerial photographs, surveyors were able to triangulate and figure out where in the rubble the building might have been. And they started digging and digging and digging like a big archaeological expedition. And finally, on September 18th, 1946, a shovel hit the first of what turned out to be 10 tin boxes. And those tin boxes were part of the first cache of the archive, which was buried on August 3rd, 1942. And there's a picture of the day they discovered those tin boxes. Wasser's back is to the camera, and a man with a mustache is handing up the boxes from a basement that they located. And the guy's name is Michal Borovich, and he also survived by a slim margin. He was actually hanged in the Janowska camp, but the rope broke, and the SS commandant, being a gentleman educated at Marburg or Heidelberg, he didn't believe in hanging people twice, so he let Borovich back into the camp, and he later escaped. Wasser said, "We buried a lot more than this. This is just a little bit of what we buried," but they couldn't find any more. And a lot of water had seeped in, a lot of documents were ruined, a lot of photographs were ruined, but that was that. And then 4 years later, by this time Wasser, Rachel Auerbach, the other survivor, had already gone to Israel. Polish construction workers in December 1950 found 2 big aluminum milk cans. And that was the second cache of the archive, buried in February 1943. And that actually protected the documents a lot better. Now, there was a third cache of the archive, which was buried a week before the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April 1943. That cache was buried in the brushmaker's shop on Świętojańska 34, which became the scene of heavy fighting during the Battle of the Warsaw Ghetto. Only one charred page was ever found from that cache. Over time, that site became the site of the Chinese embassy in Poland. About 10 years ago, Israeli searchers asked the Chinese if they could come and dig underneath their embassy. The Chinese said okay, but they couldn't find anything. Had we found that cache, we would have had a lot of insight into some of the great puzzles of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Why was it that Warsaw was the only major ghetto where the fighters had the mass support of the Jewish population? And keep in mind, without the 750 bunkers that ordinary Jews built in what was left of the Warsaw Ghetto, the uprising never could have succeeded. The fighters needed the people in order to make the uprising work. But we never found that cache. So clearly there's a lot that's been lost. Nonetheless, we have 30,000 documents that are usable and readable. As the archive is being published now in Poland, it's coming to 36 volumes. Just the catalog published by the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum runs to 500 pages. And you might want to ask, who cares? Why is this important? And the answer kind of goes to the title that I chose for my book, Who Will Write Our History? The Germans thought they were going to win the war, and they would write the history of the Jews that they murdered. The great Polish Jewish historian Isaac Schipper said in Majdanek, shortly before he died in 1943, what we know about murdered peoples is usually what their killers choose to say about them. And the Jews had a pretty good idea of what the Germans would say about them after they killed them. The Jews saw the German film crews in the ghetto, they saw the propaganda posters. They knew that the Germans would describe them as subhumans, as vermins, as people who should have been wiped out. And Jews in the ghettos said, we will leave time capsules from beyond the grave. Even if they kill us, someday those time capsules will surface and people will know us on the basis of Jewish documents and not on the basis of German documents. To write was an act of great optimism because you had to believe that Hitler was going to lose the war. If he won the war, then why bother? And keep in mind that most Polish Jews were murdered in 1942, at a time when the Germans were winning the war. But those time capsules did surface, and because of the archive in the Warsaw Ghetto and other places, historians are able to use Jewish documents. They're able to write about the history of the Jews during the war, not just as anonymous, faceless victims, but as real people with names. And this is an important posthumous victory. So Jews wrote. They wrote everywhere. The historian Shimon Dubnov, when he was being taken out to be shot at the age of 81 in the Riga ghetto in 1941, his last words were Jeden verschreibt, Jews write it all down. Under the ruins of crematorium number 3 in Auschwitz-Birkenau, in 1945 and 46, we found glass bottles stuffed with the Yiddish writings of 2 rabbis who were in the Sonderkommando for 2 years, describing what they saw inside the gas chambers and in the crematoria and in the resistance that they helped organize. Under the ruins of the Vilna Ghetto, we found a diary of Hermann Kruk, which, when it was published by Yale a few years ago, ran to more than 600 pages. The last entry was made only 4 hours before he was killed. In a death cell in Krakow's Montepeluch prison, a young Jewish woman named Justynia Dranger wrote a long journal on toilet paper. This was rolled up, it survived, it was published some years ago by the University of Massachusetts Press, and we can go on and on. In other words, Jews fought not just with guns, but they were able to fight with pen and paper. And as I said, there were many underground ghetto archives in Lodz, in Bialystok, in Vilna, but the single biggest underground archive, Jewish or non-Jewish, in all of Nazi-occupied Europe, was the Einik Shabbos, the Joy of the Sabbath, that Ringelblum organized in the Warsaw Ghetto. And it was different from these archives in many respects. First of all, it was a community. There were 60 people, including rabbis like Shimon Huberband, communists like Yehuda Feld, overcoming political differences, working side by side in pursuit of a national mission. There were the young and old, the famous, the not so famous. The archive was very well organized. There was an executive committee that met every Saturday afternoon. They charted strategy, they raised money, they vetted people that might be asked to join the archive. There were interviewers who had to go into the refugee points in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Germans dumped 100,000 refugees into the ghetto, and they lived in absolutely terrible conditions. Within a few weeks, they were covered in lice, they had typhus, and to go into those refugee centers exposed one to the danger of coming down with typhus at a time when it was very difficult to survive. And many of these interviewers did die of typhus, but nonetheless, they remained true to their mission. They went into these centers to get information about what was happening elsewhere in Poland outside the Warsaw Ghetto. There was a team of copiers who tried to make different copies of the different documents, because obviously they didn't have Xerox machines. There was a so-called technical group consisting of a teacher, Israel Lichtenstein, and two teenage boys, and only Lichtenstein and the teenagers and 3 other people, including Ringelblum. Only 6 people knew where the documents were at any one time, so if the Gestapo caught somebody, the odds were that they wouldn't be able to give away the location of the archive. The archive was also ideally camouflaged, because in the Warsaw Ghetto, there was a big aid organization called the Self-Help. It was based on 1,100 house committees in the ghetto. It ran soup kitchens, daycare centers, schools, and because some of its money came from the American Joint Distribution Committee, and because the US and Germany were not at war until Pearl Harbor, the Alleenhilfe as an organization enjoyed a certain degree of protection, and that was ideal camouflage for the archive to gather information, to employ its workers, and to get money. The Einik Shabbos archive was also unique in the sheer ambition of its agenda. Its first agenda item was to collect, to sammel, as they say in Yiddish, to collect the menus from the fancy restaurants in the ghetto, where speculators and smugglers and policemen would go and eat. Theater posters, doorbell instructions. When 5, 6 families are living in an apartment, they thought, someday people will read these doorbell instructions, how many rings per each family, to see what it's like to live in such crowded conditions. They collected the instructions issued by the Judenrat, the Jewish Council, for how to cook and prepare the rotten, frozen potatoes that the Germans dumped into the ghetto as food rations. In 1941, the archive undertook a second agenda item. They began a massive study of Jewish society under Nazi occupation. This study was slated to run to 1,600 pages. It was divided into 80 different topics, such as women under the occupation, children, corruption, religious life, Polish-Jewish relations, German-Jewish relations. Each topic had a team leader who drew up questionnaires and guidelines for the study. Some members of the Einik Shabbos were team leaders of 5 or 6 different topics. This study reflects the fact that Ringelblum and many of the leaders of the archive had, before the war, been part of an organization called the YIVO, Y-I-V-O, and a kind of a people's university to get ordinary people and scholars to work together to study in the Yiddish language the everyday life of ordinary Jews. And since this was 41, before they knew that the Germans were going to kill everybody, it was hoped that this study would help the Jews know themselves better and prepare for post-war rehabilitation. This study was in full swing when, on July 22nd, 1942, the Germans suddenly began the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. That last week of July, Ringelblum sent his messengers throughout the ghetto to tell everybody to hand over all their notes, all their unfinished material, just hand it over, there's no time to lose. And it was this material that was shoved into tin boxes and hastily buried on the night of August 3rd, 1942. And as I said, that was the first cache of the archive that was buried. Now, in the summer of 42, the Einig Shabbos went to the brink of collapse. Every day, the Germans, using the Jewish police, were catching 7,000, 10,000 Jews a day, taking them to the Umschlagplatz, to the collecting center where they lived in terrible conditions until they were shoved into trains, 100, 120 in one boxcar in the summer heat, and then taken to the gas chambers. During that summer, it's very clear that Ringelblum himself came close to nervous collapse. His handwriting changed. He couldn't finish a sentence. He was caught between his natural desire as a father and a husband to protect his family and go into hiding, and his feeling of responsibility towards the archive. During the course of those few weeks, the 60 became 50, became 40, became 30. Every day, a key member of the archive came home to find that his wife, his children had been taken away, and yet they didn't break. They kept on working. And you might ask yourself, why did they keep on working when they saw that their whole world was collapsing all around them? And a partial answer to that question can be found in an essay written by Gustawa Jarecka, a member of the archive, a woman who wrote in Polish, who had 2 kids. Because she was a stenographer in the Judenrat, she had a Judenrat pass, and Ringelblum thought that gave her a certain degree of safety to walk through the streets of the ghetto and write down everything she saw. And she was able to finish one part of an essay before she and her 2 kids were taken to Treblinka. And in this essay, which is remarkable, Jarecka asks, who could have blamed us Jews for having thought that the story of mankind, the story of history, is a story of moral progress, from savagery to humanity? How could we have known that history is going in precisely the opposite direction, from humanity to savagery? After all, before my eyes, the members of the most educated, cultured people in Europe, the Germans, are murdering kids on the street. And if that's true, that the wheel of history is going in the direction of savagery, then, and now I'm quoting her directly, I hope that my writings will serve as a stone under history's wheel. That is, that someday people might read what she wrote, say, oh my God, how could we have allowed this to happen? Let's make sure that something like this never happens again. It was during the course of 1942 that 6 escapees from German death camps arrived in the Warsaw Ghetto, 1 from Chelmno and 5 from Treblinka. And the Einig Shabbos interviewed all of them. Not one survived the war, by the way, but they interviewed all of them about what they saw in the death camps. This was the first information about the death camps. One of these interviews alone, an interview with Avram Kshepitsky, runs to more than 100 typed pages in Yiddish. Kshepitsky was in Treblinka for 11 days in August and September 1942. Using those interviews and using information gathered from other sources, the Einig Shabbos, in the course of 1942, sent 4 detailed reports to the Polish government in exile in London. The last report was sent in November 1942. It included a map of Treblinka. It was so detailed it even mentioned the color of the tiles inside the gas chambers. And this was when Treblinka was still killing people at full speed. And all those reports reached London, and the Polish underground government passed them on to the United States and to Britain. Ringelblum's motto, his watchword, was to write everything down right now, don't wait. and to write down everything you see. Don't ask questions about what's important and what's not important, because there's a war going on, and you don't know if you'll be alive tomorrow. You don't know what kind of a person you will be tomorrow, and so you simply have to write immediately and not waste any time. So he instinctively understood the difference between real-time testimony and survivor testimony. He understood the difference between the kind of information you're getting from people inside ghettos who don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, who are still inside Jewish communities that are not yet destroyed, and the testimony of survivors who are testifying after the event. For example, there was a member of the Oynik Shabbos, a woman named Cecilia Slapakova, and she was in charge of the study of women under the Nazi occupation. And she managed to complete quite a bit of it before she and her daughter were killed. And in this study, she studied a wide range of Jewish women, ranging from PhDs and librarians to a high-class woman who started a bordello, to support her family, to women who turned into smugglers. And her preliminary conclusions were that the war showed that women were psychologically much stronger than men. They had more resilience. As the war went on, more and more of the burden of keeping up the soup kitchens, taking care of kids, keeping up the house committees fell on women. And Cecilia Slapakova said, one thing I'm sure, she's writing this in May 1942, one thing I'm sure, that when the war is over, the Jewish woman will not let herself be pushed back into the kitchen. She will demand an equal place at the table. Now, let's assume that she had survived the war. She survived the death marches, went to a DP camp, married again, had a second family. And let's assume that as a grandmother living here in Swampscott or Peabody or living in Israel, she's interviewed by the Spielberg Foundation. Would she even have remembered that once upon a time she was thinking about the fate of Jewish women in post-war Poland? She probably would have forgotten what the ghetto was like. It would have become merely a holding pen, an antechamber to the camps. Her whole focus, her whole memory would have been skewed by what she knew came after. But thanks to Ringelblum, what we have are the voices of Polish Jewry in its last chapters. The kids who write in June 1942 essays in Polish, Hebrew, and Yiddish, what I want to be when the war is over. The Sabbath sermons, the Divrei Torah of the Piaseczna Rebbe, these are sermons that reflect some of the most profound Jewish theological reflections on the Holocaust as it's going on. And you see how much he changes from 1940 to 1942. Without the Oynik Shabbos, these all would have totally vanished. We have a very routine report by a Mrs. Weinberg discussing how she brings in Mrs. Cohn and Mrs. Kaplan to a meeting of their house committee to put together a list of poor kids in the building who aren't getting food and trying to match them with tenants in the building who might be able to feed them. We have a report from a ghetto mailman, Peretz Opachinsky, who describes how on September 6, 1942, in the middle of the Great Deportations, on a hot day, the Germans put a couch in the middle of a wide street, and there are toddlers on the couch crying for their parents. And any Jew who comes up to try to give those kids water or food is severely beaten. And Opachinsky writes, the Germans didn't have to put that couch there. They could have taken it away. They could have taken the kids away. They left it there just so we Jews could suffer just a little bit more, just a little bit more.